Jakarta is sinking, but the people living there, they're not waiting to drown. By 2100, Indonesia will have split into two nations in one, a high-tech fortress city carved from the Borneo jungle, and a thriving water world where 3 million people live on floating neighborhoods built from trash. One city will be controlled by algorithms, the other will be ungovernable. This is the timeline of the Great Separation, and it starts with a spreadsheet. The battle lines aren't drawn by soldiers, but by actuaries in London. In 2031, Lloyd's of London officially designates North Jakarta as an uninsurable red zone. Within 48 hours, banks freeze every 30-year mortgage in the port districts. No loans, no buyers, no way out. Property values collapse overnight, not from flooding, but from a single bureaucratic decision made 7,000 miles away. But while the banks panic, the Indonesian government unveils its audacious countermove, Nusantara. This brand new capital rises from the Borneo rainforest on schedule, gleaming with smart grids, electric transit, and a promise: zero floods, ever. For the elite, this is salvation. For everyone else, it's abandonment. The bureaucrats pack their bags and fly to the jungle, but they don't stay. Nusantara is too sterile, too quiet, too perfect. A fly-in, fly-out culture emerges, governed from Borneo during the week, party in Jakarta on weekends. The new capital has the power, but the old capital still has the soul. And the old capital is fighting back. By 2035, saltwater has breached the aquifers beneath the national monument. 10 million people wake up to find their wells undrinkable. The government's solution? Privatize the water supply. This creates a brutal black market overnight. Criminal syndicates siphon municipal pipes and sell clean water back to the poor at a 300% markup. But something unexpected happens. In the kampongs, neighborhood watch groups organize. They pool resources, dig communal wells deeper than the saltwater line, and share what they find. Yes, the mafia controls the main supply, but the people, they build their own. This is the pattern that will define Jakarta for the next 70 years. When the system fails, the neighbors don't. In 2041, the government plays its trump card, the Great Garuda Sea Wall. This colossal barrier will seal off Jakarta Bay, protecting the central business district and the national monument from the Java Sea. Construction begins at a breakneck pace. For the wealthy living in the shadow of the monument, this is hope made concrete. Property values stabilize inside the projected dry zone. But the wall has borders, and borders create exiles. The fishing communities of the outer coast are left outside, abandoned to the rising tides. In 2043, when the government orders their evacuation, they refuse. Instead, they adapt. These fishermen, whose families have lived on this coast for 300 years, begin building stilt villages that rise and fall with the water. They engineer their homes from bamboo, recycled steel, and sheer stubbornness. The media calls them resistance zones. The fishermen call them home. Meanwhile, Indonesia tries to pivot its energy grid away from coal. It fails. Decades-old contracts can't be broken, and the carbon tariffs from Europe hit hard. But this failure sparks something unexpected, a wave of nationalist innovation. If the West won't buy Indonesian goods, then Indonesia will build for itself. Domestic manufacturing surges. It's not ideal, it's not green, but it's survival. In Nusantara, the digital twin system goes live. Every resident's movements are tracked, analyzed, and optimized by AI. Crime disappears, traffic flows perfectly. The city runs like clockwork. But there's no room for the unexpected, the chaotic, the human. Jakarta remains a mess. Nusantara remains a machine. 2050. By 2052, the Great Garuda Wall is complete. The ribbon-cutting ceremony is broadcast nationally. politicians declare victory over the ocean. For 3 months, it works. Then the bay starts to rot. Sealed off from the sea, Jakarta Bay becomes a giant stagnant pond. River runoff and sewage that used to flow into the ocean now have nowhere to go. Toxic algae blooms explode across the surface, choking the water with a thick green poison. The miasma zone spreads inland, bringing respiratory disease and swarms of mosquitoes. The elite, who paid for waterfront property, now pay to flee it. They retreat toward the National Monument, which becomes the anchor of a shrinking, hyper-defended dry island. But in the working-class neighborhoods, something remarkable is happening. With arable land scarce, residents begin farming vertically. Abandoned office towers become hydroponic farms. Rooftops sprout gardens of bok choy, tomatoes, and chili peppers. A network of roof farmers emerges, mostly elderly women who remember their grandmother's farms in the countryside. They teach the young, they share seeds, they refuse to starve. This guerrilla agriculture doesn't solve the food crisis, but it keeps people fed. And it proves a point. Jakarta doesn't need saving from above. It saves itself, one rooftop at a time. Across the sea in Borneo, Nusantara expands into a stable metropolis of 4 million. It settles into its role as a competent, boring service capital. It will never be Singapore, but for Indonesia's exhausted middle class, it offers something better than glory: predictability, dry streets, clean air, a future their kids can plan for. The migration begins in earnest.
If this vision of the future got your attention, hit the like button. Subscribe if you want more timelines like this. It helps the algorithm decide who sees this next. Now, back to the collapse.
In 2067, during monsoon season, a section of the Great Garuda Wall fails. A 200-meter segment cracks under seismic pressure, and the Java Sea pours through. 40,000 homes flood in 6 hours. The government patches the breach, but the message is clear. The wall is mortal, and it's losing the war of attrition. Repairing the wall becomes a bottomless pit for the national budget. Every year, the maintenance costs climb. Every year, the outer provinces see their schools and hospitals defunded to keep Jakarta dry. Resentment festers in Sumatra and Sulawesi. Why should they sacrifice for the Javanese elite? The city is breaking, but its people are not. Jakarta's population drops to 8 million, but those who remain are bound by something stronger than law: mutual survival. In Borneo, the green forest city branding begins to crack. Squatter settlements sprawl beyond the planned boundaries, severing wildlife corridors. The orangutan sanctuaries become zoos. Environmental groups protest, but the city functions. It's not the utopia they promised, but is standing. By the 2070s, Jakarta splits into 2 parallel realities. Inside the dikes, central Jakarta survives as a dry island anchored by the National Monument. Industrial pumps run 24/7, keeping the water at bay. Living here costs a fortune in protection taxes, but the middle class clings to this zone like a life raft. They spend 60% of their income just to stay dry. Outside the walls, something extraordinary has taken root. The Amphibious Society is no longer a disaster zone. It's a functioning civilization. Residents build floating neighborhoods on recycled plastic pontoons and oil drums. They travel by skiff through canals that used to be streets, and they trade outside the reach of the state. This water-based economy is chaotic, ungovernable, and thriving. In 2074, a documentary crew films a floating night market in the old Pluit district. The footage goes viral. The world sees vendors selling grilled fish from boats, children diving for coins thrown by tourists, a makeshift movie theater built on lashed-together rafts, screening pirated films under the stars. It's not supposed to work, but it does. Energy becomes the choke point. The pumps protecting the dry highland consume vast amounts of electricity. Desalination plants run non-stop to provide drinking water. The grid can't handle it. In 2076, Indonesia installs its first small modular nuclear reactors, not as a symbol of progress, but out of sheer desperation. The reactors work, but the grid remains fragile, and rolling blackouts become routine in non-essential districts. The state prioritizes the pumps over the people. In Nusantara, life is stable, sanitized, and increasingly surveilled. The digital twin tracks every transaction, every movement, every dissenting voice. It's safe, but it's suffocating. In the 2080s, Nusantara becomes a victim of its own success. Climate migrants flood the city. Refugees from sinking Pacific islands, flooded Javanese coasts, and collapsing delta cities across Southeast Asia. The planned capacity shatters. A dense ring of concrete high-rises erupts around the pristine government core. These migrant neighborhoods are cramped, sweltering, and loud, but they're alive. Street food vendors set up on every corner. Languages from a dozen nations mix in the markets. For the first time, Nusantara has a soul. It's messy, chaotic, and nothing like the architects intended, but it's finally human. Back in Jakarta, the port struggles. The seawall's locks create a logistical nightmare for shipping. Industries relocate to Surabaya or Vietnam. The old capital deindustrializes, but this clears the air. For the first time in a century, you can see stars over Jakarta at night. The city becomes quiet, strange, almost peaceful, a ghost of its former self, but still breathing. Life shifts to a nocturnal rhythm. Wet bulb temperatures make midday work lethal, so the entire economy moves to the night. Construction crews pour concrete at 2 a.m. Markets open at sunset. The floating districts host night festivals that draw curious tourists from around the world. They come to see the city that refused to die. In the amphibious zones, a unique culture flourishes. Artists paint murals on the sides of half-submerged buildings. Musicians perform from floating stages. A new generation grows up never knowing what it means to live on solid ground, and they don't mourn what was lost. This is all they've ever known, and it's enough. By the 2090s, the National Monument still stands, dry and defiant, but it looks out over a radically different horizon. North Jakarta has been officially de-gazetated, bureaucratically surrendered to the sea. The government erases it from the maps. The Amphibious Society already knew. They've been living this reality for decades. Now it's just official. A new industry rises from the ruins, waste mining. The submerged landfills of the 20th century are treasure troves of metals and plastics. Divers descend into the flooded ruins, salvaging what the old world threw away. This circular economy is controlled by powerful waste mining guilds, organized, disciplined, and politically influential. They negotiate with Nusantara as equals. In 2094, a guild leader is elected to the provincial council. The old capital may be sinking, but it still has a voice. The split between the two capitals is now absolute. Nusantara is glass, steel, and algorithms. Jakarta is rust, water, and resilience. One runs on data, the other runs on grit. But here's the thing the planners never understood. You can't kill a city by drowning it. You can only change what it becomes. In the year 2100, Jakarta is officially designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Venice of the Tropics. The National Monument stands as a lighthouse in the center of the flooded city, protected by pumps that never stop. Disaster tourism becomes the primary industry. Electric boats ferry visitors through the drowned avenues, past half-submerged skyscrapers, through floating markets that glow with lantern light. The locals serve as guides, telling stories of the city that was. But they're not mourning, they're thriving. 3 million people live in the amphibious zones. They've built a society that exists nowhere else on Earth. Nusantara survives as a functional metropolis of 6 million. It's stable, it's boring, it works. History judges the project as a successful failure.
It saved the state, but it couldn't save the land. But the real story, though, it's in the water. In 2099, a grandmother in the floating district of Pluit teaches her granddaughter how to tie the knots that keep their house anchored against the current. The same knots her grandmother taught her in the fishing village a lifetime ago. The girl asks, "Nene, were you scared when the water came?" The grandmother smiles. "Scared now, Sayang. We lived with water our whole lives. We just learned to live with a little more." A city is not its concrete. A city is its people. They did not drown. They learned to float, and they're still here.